I would like to read for you a work of fiction that I wrote. This work of fiction was actually inspired by a piece of music. So what I'd like to do is try and incorporate that music into the reading. And hopefully I can get the timing right. And I hope you enjoy. Lillian. It was on the last night of the world, in the age of midnight blue, when I remembered I loved her. The ding of our 1980s microwave brought me to my senses in the kitchenette. I pulled out the steaming bag of popcorn, holding it delicately by a corner, and then I walked with it through our sitting room toward the balcony. As I passed through the domed room, I glanced up at its decorations and paused, seeing for the first in a long time the tapestries, landscapes, and wood carvings adorning our walls. As I looked them over, I said something in silence. Perhaps not a goodbye, but an acknowledgement that they had indeed been there all this while. Like all the marching details of my life, these figures and images would soon blur, losing their definition even before I had cared to give them meaning. It had not always been this way. But now, in the present, I found myself harmoniously unconcerned. A map of the Benadir coast drew my eye now, and I remembered history, what it had been like in that very first world. I also remembered that by the grace of our God, Lillian, all this was ours and hers to take away. I stepped out onto the balcony, pulling open the popcorn bag. The smoke vented out and singed my hand a little, but the night's air instantly cooled the pain. I stood there, letting the popcorn simmer, and took in the night. Sitting to my right, in one of the deck chairs, reading only by the light of the gibbous moon, was my wife. Her name is also Lillian. I have never questioned this. She sat in repose, turning the pages of a new book of poems like days of another year. In the background, our antique radio was tuned to a station I couldn't make out. That was how she liked to read, with the radio on, but too quiet to be heard. I looked down the grassy bluff on which our house was perched to the shimmering tides of the bay below. A crowd had gathered in the shallows and on the sandbars to frolic as if on a summer day, the silver moon as their foster sun. Receding along the coast, past the bay, glowed the lights of homes just like ours, candles set out in an empty space. Leon. I watched the celebration for a moment, listening for the strangers' muted shouts to one another as they counted away their time. Tonight's the night, I reminded Lillian. Perhaps only a few more minutes. She did not reply, except to turn another page. I never remember much of the end, I added. She spoke to me now, saying, I don't think we're meant to. As I've come to understand it, I said, one has to die in order to live. And she replied, that sounds too poetic for your taste. I looked down at her and smiled, smirked, perhaps. Are you going to tell me I won't finish my book? She asked. I was. So I answered, I was going to say your habits amuse me, that it seems odd to spend your time reading about other worlds when you could be enjoying the ones you're given. Her eyes paused on the page. This is how I like to enjoy them. And she did not have to explain any more, because we both knew what was true. Someday, she would read about this night, and I would look out from our balcony into that book. Then, on an unsaid cue, the ocean breeze I hadn't noticed faded, and the world fell still. A final broadcast sounded over the radio, reciting words I suddenly yearned to know. I reached for the knob and turned it louder, but I struggled to make out its meaning.
Poetry is a formality, continual greeting and leave-taking for all that we encounter between a darkness and a darkness. Hail and farewell to the seven brave spectrums. Goodbye dawn, hello sunset, and each particular thing that we learn to love, we must learn to live without. Celebrate this.
As it finished, the end began. The sky glowed with a silver light, spreading out from the moon. I dropped my bag of uneaten popcorn, and it spilled around my shoes as I looked up and permitted my mouth to fall open. The light poured down around us, filling our veins, gently taking us apart and pulling us back toward our master. At last, my wife set down her book and stood up beside me, even as she came apart. As I turned and watched her disintegrate, half of her still my wife Lillian, and half of her already that incorporeal Lillian, she suddenly could wait no more and heaved her body, scattering it like ash in the wind to be swallowed up and once again made whole. At that exact moment, I knew I loved her, my mate and my creator. I was so affected that I cried 2 tears that were instantly swept away. The light coursed up my neck and touched the base of my brain, and I cringed and pulled against it like a child who needs no reason to resist. Then I released and surrendered my flesh. As I was carried away, I lost all track of what I was, except for energy. And with me, the remaining world was returned as a single inhalation of God. We awoke in the dark bedroom of a quiet neighborhood, my wife lying below me under the sheets. I reached up to stroke her hair, and she opened her eyes. "Are you ready?" I whispered. She smirked at me. "Am I alive?" Thank you. Big shout out to Leon for his help with the audio.